Okay, let's run this back one more time. My name is Cabbage Boy. I was bitten by the content creator Spider, and for the past 1 year and 9 months, I have been this platform's one of many film tours. I'm pretty sure you know the rest. I made a bunch of lame, poorly made videos, done a podcast, made a Patreon, regretted making a Patreon, adhered to the algorithm by subjugating myself to solely animated content because it's somehow the main reason why any of you are still here past the 30-second mark. What was I saying? And now I think I'm slowly starting to become a Sonic tuber. But I still make other things, I promise. Because no matter how many times I get copyright claimed, how many comments I get about my ridiculous voice, or how many Sonic videos I'll make just to please my audience, I always find a way to come back to Spider-Man. I've been finding it rather difficult to talk about comic book movies for the longest time. And that's mainly because, as sad as this is to admit, it doesn't give my channel as much traction as opposed to my more recent content. So I am sorry to say this, but I need to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse for a bit. Now, I went into this movie fully expecting to have this movie not live up to Into the Spider-Verse, because I simply thought that movie was too perfect to top. Every time I have come back to Into the Spider-Verse, I find about 3 more reasons to love it even further. And honestly, I think the main reason is because how much of a work of art it felt like. It didn't feel like any other movie I've ever seen. Its storytelling, characters, animation, usage of familiar tropes coming together to tell this whole new narrative didn't feel real. And it still doesn't. Into the Spider-Verse has been one of the most influential films, and to this day, animation lives by that movie's example. And that example is to try something new. Movies should not be afraid to experiment and trust the audience to go outside their comfort zone a little bit. You see, the main problem with a lot of franchise movies that's become even more apparent nowadays is not the fact that it's a popular IP, it's the fact that it all feels the same. It follows the same formula of plot development and storytelling because audiences tend to get upset otherwise. Movies like the MCU Spider-Man trilogy got a lot of hate because it wasn't their ideal Spider-Man story. And honestly, this mindset of audiences giving companies so much backlash because it isn't exactly what they want from a story is why I'm even having this discussion in the first place. You don't believe me? Funny you say that, because I have 2 hours and 22 minutes of proof that backlash due to a movie doing something fucking original can only lead to disastrous consequences.
Somehow, don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
The point being is that Into the Spider-Verse continues to be a movie that feels unrivaled by most. So I was scared going into this movie. But that being said, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse doesn't feel like any movie I've ever seen. Everything that Into the Spider-Verse did, this movie somehow made leaps beyond it. Yeah, I can't believe I'm even saying that. The characters are more defined than ever, where these people don't even feel like fictional characters anymore. The story is everything you could ever want from a multiverse movie and more. And the score, holy fuck, the score is absolutely spectacular. And if I'm to be honest, I don't think Into the Spider-Verse could ever top the masterclass of a story that Across the Spider-Verse has. And that is saying a lot. This story is something that keeps on getting better as the movie goes along. It does a really solid job of building up the main conflict of the movie, paralleling a lot of the plot points with Miles. At the start of the movie, we are introduced to Gwen instead of Miles. However, this is so we can see Gwen having to deal with her identity with her dad, so that flows along with Miles dealing with his identity with his parents. The comparison behind what happens when Gwen is forced to reveal her identity to Miles, who hides it too much, strengthens the theme of acceptance. Miles constantly has to struggle with finding the people who accept him for who he truly is. However, once he actually finds those people, he learns the hard way that it was all conditional, which made him unafraid to open up to Rio by the end, which, by how Gwen's story wraps up, shows how much closer it can bring them together. Acceptance is the main theme of this movie, and the more Miles' family drama continues, the more apparent that becomes. Rio and Jeff aren't willing to accept that Miles is growing up and wants to live his life his way. The dynamic between these three has Miles go through a rebellious teen phase, but it's a trope that is woven so massively with his arc throughout the movie. His arguments with his parents heighten Miles' frustration at the world when we eventually see how Miguel views Miles as Spider-Man. How it has to be controlled by those who come before you. Every beat from Miles simply living his life in Brooklyn is perfectly integrated to how his experiences as Spider-Man are later on. It's insane how much time this movie takes to tell the life of Miles Morales for the sole purpose of building up to when we eventually get to the main conflict of the movie. Miles doesn't meet Miguel until we're over halfway through the movie, and seeing that build-up pay off in such a satisfying way tells us how expertly paced this movie is. And that's the real advantage behind having a good amount of this movie building up to the main conflict between Miles and Miguel. We get a lot of time to flesh out the characters that didn't get the chance to do so in the first movie. Miles got enough character development in the first movie, but here he's somehow even more defined. In the first movie, he needs to prove that he is ready to bestow upon such a role like being Spider-Man. In this movie, he now has to prove that he belongs in that role, to show Miguel and the rest of the Spider people that he is Spider-Man. And it's not just that, he also needs to show his parents that he can go out and live his own life without the guidance of his parents. He just needs to go out and spread his wings, man. You get the point. I also really enjoy his rebellious nature in this. Like I've said, how he acts towards his parents works wonders for when he interacts with the Spider Society. But I also like how this relates to his independency and his fearlessness. He has to somehow prove to hundreds of Spider people throughout the multiverse that he is Spider-Man, despite how much he deviates from the idea of it. And using that time to flesh out his personality in the first half makes the events of the main conflict feel believable. He's not afraid to do whatever it takes to get his point across, whether it be arguing his parents about moving away, or arguing against the entire multiverse of people just like him that he belongs. So much of Miles' character feels so uncomfortably real that he's become more relatable to me personally than Peter Parker ever has. And Miles isn't the only person that is blessed with this treatment. Gwen as a character gets much more spotlight and time to be a character than in the last movie. She is a very prominent co-lead that creates a well-written relationship with her and Miles. And while I still think that Miles is the main focus of this movie, I'm sorry, but his theme can't even compare to Gwen's. Every time she is the focus of a scene and her drums kick in, I start to forget who this movie is about. And as I've said, her story fits very well with Miles' at the start of the movie. She has to go through such a tragedy as losing a best friend, and that pain carries over when she is forced to hurt another. You can clearly tell how hurt she is when she has to constantly lie to Miles as to why she hasn't seen him, or why she lies about so many truths that are revealed later on. It leads to such an emotional outburst towards her father at the end because of how tired she is of hiding half of who she is to people. Feeling like she's betrayed and hurt the most important people in her life as a result. That she failed at the hero she saw in her dad. Hoping that just for a moment, she can feel like less of a failure. I'm not even going to pretend that a lot of her arc isn't a trans allegory, because in a lot of ways, it kind of is. The color palette of a lot of her scenes proves this, but it's also the idea of her constantly trying to hide a huge part of herself, along with the scene of her and her dad at the end. While I personally don't believe that she is trans herself, I do really appreciate the depths of storytelling that this movie has and how differently people can interpret her story with real-life comparisons. That's how you know that you've made a pretty damn good movie. Speaking of real-world comparisons, I need to talk about arguably the best fucking character in this movie. Hobby goddamn Brown. And I say this knowing that Pavitri Paparka, Miguel O'Hara, Spot, and Lego Peter Parker exist. Hobby is just such a real one, man. His carefree nature over the shackles that the establishment tries to put on him makes for an amazing character. And his views on society and the expectations the world puts on him is really great foreshadowing for when we get to the main conflict. I also just love how much him and Miles get along. When it was first revealed that there'd be some form of a love triangle between him, Gwen, and Miles, I was almost ready to give up on this movie. But I guess they don't believe in consistency because it is nothing like that at all. Hobby and Gwen have such a harmless relationship, and to see him get along with Miles and give him genuinely good advice about being Spider-Man makes him even more lovable. It's great to see just how much of a core character he is to the purpose of the film with how little screen time he's given. Because Hobby's views on the restrictions that the establishment tries to uphold ties into the biggest conflict that all the promotion has been hyping up for. Miguel O'Hara. I personally have to thank Oscar Isaac for putting on such a masterful performance and for his huge help in giving us one of the strongest antagonists in a superhero movie. Because a lot of his hate towards Miles is fueled by his own tragedy. He has chosen to lose the person he wants to be to become the person he feels like he needs to be. Miguel forced himself into the role of watching over the entire multiverse for anomalies because of his guilt of causing his own incursion. Him weaponizing an entire crew of spider people, including someone like Jessica Drew, out of spite is what makes him such a great force for Miles to overcome. A lot of people really do not like Jessica's character in this, especially considering how passive she felt at the start of the movie. I do admit that the sudden shift in personality felt strange to me on the first viewing, so I think I got a little more adjusted to it on my rewatch. It proves just how influential Miguel is as a leader for his elite crew. How far gone he is regarding the role of Spider-Man that he's handpicked a crew of spider people that knows will follow him to get his point further across to Miles, subjugating himself to an algorithm as to how Spider-Man is supposed to function, fully believing that if that web of destiny is broken, that the universe would collapse. And I use the term believing very strongly because I think that the canon events aren't exactly what he portrays them to be due to Miles' role in the narrative. It really does feel like he's projecting his own anger and sadness onto Miles because of what happened to him. And that's causing him to jump to conclusions so that he doesn't feel like it was just his fault as to what happened to the original Miguel's universe. There are a lot of times where Miguel shows that he has lost a huge part of his sanity, and people like Peter B and Gwen see him slipping. Everything about Miguel's antagonistic nature is the perfect force for Miles. Miguel revealing to Miles that he was never supposed to exist as Spider-Man is both a great use of meta-commentary and a service to Miles' struggle throughout the movie. He has been told for so long that his life isn't his to live, and here the struggle cannot be proven any further, being told that he was a mistake, that he doesn't belong, that his life literally is not his to live. This reveal makes the story by far one of the most important Spider-Man stories to me. Learning to move past that insecurity, doubt, and fear that others try to implant in Miles hits me in feelings that I never even knew that could be hit while watching a movie. I unironically am not the same man I was 2 hours and 26 minutes ago. And that's what creates yet another strong parallel in this movie, as if there weren't enough.
I am the Spot.
Yes, I'm talking about the Spot. I know that you all love me talking about the genius inner working behind Miguel O'Hara's character and his dynamic with Miles, but this guy needs to get talked about more, because I don't think enough people talk about how connected these two characters feel. Because much like Miles, Spot was nothing more than a mistake. This man was hit by a bagel and ended up becoming Miles' arch nemesis. He has such a petty motivation behind his villainy, but he ends up being one of the most terrifying forces near the end of the movie. However, the thing that makes Miles and Spot's rivalry work so well is the story revelations that are to come later. The fact that both of them are a mistake in the universe gives these two so much more than just a comedic rivalry turned for the worse. Spot and Miles both tie into the main reason there was even a sequel to begin with. The first movie is all about proving that anybody can wear the mask. However, this movie is continuing from that theme as to how you wear it. A big example of this is Miguel. Miguel believes that Spider-Man must follow a set of rules to be worthy of being Spider-Man, and that standard eventually led to him losing sight of the true essence on how to be Spider-Man. Here, both Miles and Spot were pure accidents. While Miles remains a hero, Spot sees this as an insult to him that feels the need to prove himself. Both are feeling the weight of expectations being laid on them, but it's how they handle this constant pressure that really counts towards the theme this movie presents. Miles handles this by trying to save that one person, despite all odds, while Spot is so fueled with anger that he feels the need to eradicate everything Miles loves to prove a point. This is something that is for sure to be explored in the second half of the movie, because while this sets up an extremely interesting dynamic between them, there unfortunately isn't enough time for Miles and Spot to interact after this plot development. Yes, while this movie is still, in my opinion, a masterpiece, I'm not going to pretend that this movie won't piss a lot of people off. This is only half of the story to be told.
What the hell is this?
So a good amount of this movie is building up towards the second half to combine itself into this one huge film. And it's not like Infinity War and Endgame where there's a marginal time skip either. With how this movie ends, it feels like it's going to pick up almost immediately after this one ends. And that's why a lot of this movie might not feel like it has a satisfying conclusion to a lot of stuff. Gwen is really the only one who I feel like gets a huge payoff to her story by the end of the movie. However, I can't really say the same for Miles. His story doesn't feel complete due to the way things ended. There's a lot of threads in his struggles that are left to connect and resolve. And this is why I say that Miguel's whole idea behind the canon events feel like a delusion created by his own trauma. Miles coming in contact with Earth 42's Miles, who has now become the Prowler instead of Spider-Man, leaves for so many holes in Miguel's idea of the Spiderverse. There was a lot of unanswered questions behind no consequences coming to Miles' universe after over a year of him being Spider-Man. Not to mention with Gwen's dad quitting as captain by the end of the film, effectively breaking yet another canon event. Now, normally, this is where the idea of plot holes start to kick in and would put this movie's quality in question. But that doesn't feel fair. This is only half of the story being presented to us. There was still over 2 hours, maybe even 3 of story left. And honestly, I have absolutely no idea how this movie will continue on. I'm not even going to pretend to theorize what's going to happen because I absolutely trust the shit out of Chris Miller and Phil Lord. They have created 2 of my favorite superhero movies of all time, and I have no doubt that they will do the same a 3rd time. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to be happy about this. I understand that a slower story is not going to be for everyone. Having to wait so long for something to get resolved is something a lot of general audiences aren't going to be happy with. It's one of the main reasons why people didn't really vibe with shows like Andor or Breaking Bad because of how slow paced it is. So to an extent, I can get why some people may not enjoy this movie as much as the first one. Unless you're, these people.
And I'm not too well informed on the character of Spider-Woman, so don't criticize me for this, but I was confused to see her being black.
I already knew it wasn't gonna be a top Spider-Man because it was cartoon style. You know what I'm saying?
It felt like in a lot of ways like Lord and Miller kind of wanted to push it into more of a woke direction, but they didn't want to have a backlash with it, kind of like with they wanted to still keep it kind of.
However, I can get behind this. While I don't think I can properly score this movie due to it not having a proper conclusion, there was still a lot I can adore about this movie. It is perfectly paced with excellent characters, absolutely hilarious, while somehow topping into Spiderverse in the animation and score department. But the one thing that I love about this movie more than the first is just how meaningful its message is to me personally. This is going to come off as extremely biased, and this is 100% subjective, but I really do appreciate the value behind acceptance in this movie. Gwen and Miles struggling to find people who truly accept them, feeling betrayed by the people closest to them, and having a hauntingly real outburst to come from Gwen all contributes to my emotional attachment to the film. Now, I'm gonna be real with you all for a minute, but this is something I've been struggling with for the longest time. I've always had a problem trying to find that right person who truly sees and accepts me for who I am wholeheartedly, flaws and all. And seeing all those intrusive and deep personal thoughts being presented in such a beautiful, near life-changing 2.5-hour experience makes this movie somehow more personally attached to me more than Into the Spider-Verse has been. And that's why I believe when there actually will be a proper conclusion in Beyond the Spider-Verse, that this will undoubtedly be my favorite set of films I've ever experienced. So much that I'm not even done talking about it yet.